Got it. Good Friday morning, everyone, and welcome to the Urban Ecology Center's Backyard Naturalist, Season 3, Episode 7. Hello, Harvest Men. My name is Tim, and I'm your host this week. I hope you were able to tune in the last few weeks for some excellent contributions from the wonderful folks at Wisconsin Sea Grant. And I especially enjoyed last week's cooking demonstration, a first for Backyard Naturalist, and hopefully not the last, to make a Wisconsin fish chowder. So if you missed some of the great recent episodes, be sure to check them out on the UEC YouTube channel. It is October, and for the next 3 weeks, as we approach Halloween, we're going to get a bit creepy and crawly, starting with the harvestmen that are lurking in your basement, climbing up your walls or across your ceilings as we speak. If you think you're ever alone in your house, you are wrong. And as always, a quick shout out to those of you who subscribe to the series. If you enjoy it, I'd love for you to consider supporting us with a subscription. And also, I'm very grateful to those of you who are members of the Urban Ecology Center. Our branches are once again open to the public with limited hours. And if you are a member over the age of 21, there will be a sunset cider tasting this Saturday, October 16th from 5:30 to 8:30 at Riverside Park, along with our partners at Pour Inc., Island Orchard Cider, Triciclo Peru, and Asian International Market. There will be a lot of tasty food and drink to nibble and sip as the sun sets over the autumn colors of Riverside Park. And you'll leave with great memories and a commemorative glass. Also, our friends at Jewish Museum Milwaukee are offering UEC members a 20% discount to their new amazing exhibit, Scrapyard Innovators of Recycling, which runs through January 30th. 2022, and the museum has many other fantastic events coming up, including a virtual conversation on race and waste and a community textile recycling day, November 7th, and much more. So check out the Jewish Museum Milwaukee website for all those fantastic events. And then also friends at the Glass Pantry, a zero waste bulk store located in Walker's Point, will be offering a 10% discount for the month of October for UEC members. So if you were inspired by Meenal's Backyard Naturalist talk on plastics a few months ago, this would be a fantastic local business to patronize in your plastic-free journey. So lots of great benefits to being a UEC member, and becoming a member is the best way to support the center. And another important note before we start, last Monday was White Sunday in Samoa, a day for communities to celebrate childhood. And on that day, children are afforded special privileges normally reserved for elders. And it was also Indigenous Peoples Day, and the Urban Ecology Center's land acknowledgement is almost officially recognized. And Ethan's going to read it to you.
Great, thanks, Tim. We don't do land acknowledgements every week, but there's a lot going on, and so this is a great time to, again, remind and think about the past history, future, and present. So this is our just about our official Urban Ecology Center land acknowledgement that we are very close to finalizing. We acknowledge that the land and waterways that we steward, learn from, and love are located near the shores of Michigami, commonly referred to as Lake Michigan. And they're on the traditional lands of Indigenous peoples, including the Potawatomi, Menominee, and Ho-Chunk. Past, present, and future caretakers of these lands and waters include the Ojibwe, Peoria, Sauk, Fox, Oneida, Mohican, Brothertown, and other Indigenous peoples. As we celebrate and connect people to these natural spaces, we acknowledge that the land and waterways of Milwaukee have been the home of Indigenous peoples long before European settlement, before memory or record. These lands and waterways were stolen from Indigenous peoples who were forcibly removed or slain by colonizers. There are many communities in the Milwaukee area today who are keeping the stories, languages, and traditions of Indigenous peoples alive.
Thank you, Ethan. And this map is from wisconsinfirstnations.org. Okay, one final important event, Birdability Week runs from Monday, October 18th through Sunday, October 24th. Birdability Week is a celebration of birders with disabilities and other health concerns and an opportunity to share resources and ideas to help the birding community be accessible, inclusive, and welcoming to everybody and everybody. An annual event held in October and supported by National Audubon. It was inspired by Black Birders Week, Latino Conservation Week, and Let's Go Birding Together. Okay, on with the show, The Harvestmen. So I grew up calling these critters daddy longlegs, and I'm sure many of you did too. And it wasn't until I was older and a bit more refined, AKA biologically snooty, that I started referring to them as harvestmen. And this transformation happened to me with other organisms. So ladybugs became ladybird beetles, sticky bugs became burdock, and dookie on a stick became black knot, because you just never know when Tori is listening. But I'm trying to recapture my youth more and more and training myself to revert back to the things I called them as kids. So I still like to call them daddy longlegs, seagulls, Canadian geese. I know there are valid reasons not to, but I feel more and more appreciative of retaining local customs and names. But essentially, whether we say harvestmen or sometimes harvesters, daddy longlegs, or sometimes even granddaddy longlegs, we are referring to an order of arachnids in the order Opiliones. And to get there, we'll take a couple of quick steps back. So our featured critter today is an animal. It's part of the arthropod phylum, and we featured a number of arthropods on the show. Any of the insects, we get into arthropods, particularly in the potato bug episode from season 1, but a quick review, it's the largest group of animals. They have hard exoskeletons made of chitin and other proteins. They have jointed paired limbs on body segments that are bilaterally symmetrical. They grow by shedding the exoskeleton to reveal a new one that expands while soft and then hardens. So this group includes insects, crustaceans, centipedes, millipedes, and my favorite, the extinct trilobites. And the name arthropod means jointed foot. There are 5 major groups or subphyla of arthropods, and harvestmen belong to the chelicerates, whose name derives from Greek and means claw horn. This group contains the arachnids, sea spiders, and a bunch of extinct lineages. Chelicerates evolved 500 million years ago as marine animals, but the only surviving marine species today in this group is the horseshoe crab. Unlike insects that have head, thorax, abdomen, chelicerates have 2 segments that really roll off the tongue much more easily. Prosoma and opistosoma. They have 2 appendages that appear near the mouth, usually used as pincers for feeding, or in the case of spiders, also to inject venom into prey. They have an open circulatory system with a tube-like heart, gills or lungs, depending on where they live, and a central nervous system that fuses into a large brain-like mass in the head or the cephalothorax. They often rely on modified bristles to gain information from the surroundings through vibrations, air or water currents, or chemical changes. This group started out as entirely predators, but now they've diversified to include parasites, herbivores, scavengers, and detritivores. And they can have some surprisingly elaborate courtship rituals. Some give birth to live young, and some will even protect and feed their young. 3 groups of chelicerates have independently evolved venom: spiders, scorpions, and pseudoscorpions. Sometimes this venom can be deadly to humans, but we've also used these compounds in medical applications, including cancer treatment. And then the next group down for the daddy longlegs is the class Arachnida, Greek for spider, named for the Greek mythological character Arachne, whose hubris and skill ended up getting her turned into a spider by the gods. The arachnids include spiders, but also scorpions, ticks, mites, horseshoe crabs, and harvestmen. Most have 8 legs, and they often will adapt these legs to perform other functions, and sometimes other appendages have grown in size so that they look like they have extra legs. There are about 100,000 named arachnids, almost all of which are terrestrial. And I think it's easy for us to think of arachnids as just spiders, but all of these lovely non-spider creatures are also arachnids. And finally, we make it to the order Opiliones, which is the group that we know of as the harvestmen. They look like spiders, but they're not closely related. They're actually more closely related to the mites, scorpions, pseudoscorpions, and silifuges than they are to spiders. But they look and behave to us like our house spiders. And that's why it's easy for us to put them in that spider box, even though they don't belong there. There are probably about 10,000 species of harvestmen currently found on all continents that are not named Antarctica. And they are an old group with fossils dating back 400 million years in Scotland. And their body shape has changed very, very little since then. It's been a good plan that stayed for many hundreds of millions of years. So first things first, how are they different from spiders? The two most basic differences involve body parts that we can easily see. So spiders show, like the one on the lower right, show two distinct parts, a head or the cephalothorax and an abdomen that are usually clearly separated by a thinner waist. Harvestmen also have these two parts, but the waist is much wider, so much wider that it appears that they fused into one body part. And the bug lady references an author that calls them Rice Krispie on legs, a Rice Krispie on legs, which I will now always think of, just like a chimney swift is a flying cigar, a tinamou is a walking football, and now I have a Rice Krispie on legs. Another big difference between the two is that harvestmen have a single pair of eyes, where a spider has usually 3 to 4 pairs of eyes. So those are the two big differences. A couple other big differences that may be more important to us as we look at the wolf spider on the left and the harvestman on the right. Harvestmen can't spin silk, therefore can't make webs. So if you see a web, it's not made by a harvestman in your house. And harvestmen also do not have fangs, and they do not produce venom. No fangs, no venom, no webs. So I heard it growing up. You probably heard it too, that daddy longlegs have enough venom to kill a human, but their fangs are too small to break the human skin. Or you may have heard that they are the most venomous creature on the planet, but they can't do any harm to us because their fangs are too small. So we sadly put that in the urban legend department, but feel free to use it to your advantage if you wish in the future. But harvestmen can't bite you or really hurt you at all. So as far as humans go, they're utterly harmless. But that doesn't mean they're defenseless. And for the next few slides, we'll go through several of the really cool adaptations that harvestmen have evolved to protect themselves. One of which is that although they don't have venom, they do have a pair of scent glands. And we had this question in the chat at the beginning that they secrete what is described as a peculiar smelling fluid when disturbed. So not a bad smelling, a peculiar smelling fluid. In some species, that fluid can be quite noxious, but for humans, this fluid would barely register to our senses unless we got our noses really, really close. We probably wouldn't smell them at all, but some scientists have learned to identify the smell of certain species based on this defensive fluid. And Casey Fowler Finn, an arachnid expert at St. Louis University, as quoted in the New York Times, describes it as it's like sweet but bitter chocolate, maybe a bit buttery. But for most of us, even if you stepped on it, and I hope you don't, we wouldn't even notice it. The scent does work on smaller creatures like ants that might try to kill a harvestman, so it is effective, and this is categorized as a secondary defense. Their primary forms of defense are crypsis, aposematism, and mimicry. So we'll go through these briefly. The primary form of defense for harvestmen is by far crypsis. They're extremely well camouflaged. When I'm camping or hiking, sometimes I like to pick a random tree and look very closely at the bark. And that's often what it takes to finally find a harvestman. And then once I start looking, you find that there's a lot more around than you expected, but they're just extremely well hidden, camouflaged, usually against tree bark where they remain motionless. And then the other times you see them, as we mentioned earlier, is when you're sitting around reading a book, or most often when you're lying in your tent and you see one crawling about exploring for food. There are a few species, and I think this is super cool, that will actually cover themselves with sticky bodily secretions that act like glue. And then they walk through the debris in the leaf litter, and then stuff starts to stick to them. And then when they remain frozen, they're absolutely hidden. They're literally covered in leaf debris and just can't be found. Some that have harder shells will have liverworts growing on their bodies for extra camouflage. So really the primary defense is just not to be seen by anything that will eat you, potential predators through crypsis or camouflage. But some species have taken it in the opposite direction. Opposite, I'm going to get this word wrong every time, aposematism. And this is when animals that are quite dangerous, usually because they are venomous, become brightly colored because they want you to be seen. They want you to know that they're there and they're dangerous and you should leave them alone, because if you attack them, you both could get badly injured, and that's a lose-lose situation. So some of the most highly venomous creatures are often brightly colored, and some harvestmen are also brightly colored, not because they're venomous, but because they're armored, which is a secondary defense that's tied to this primary defense. So some harvestmen around the world can look pretty intimidating. The spines and armor on their chelicerae or back can cause some pretty nasty damage, again, mostly to smaller creatures that want to eat them. So these species have gone in the opposite direction and have evolved to show off their armor with bright colors to remind daytime predators that they shouldn't mess with them. And I certainly wouldn't. Another primary defense is mimicry, where a species itself is not dangerous, but it evolves to resemble a different species that is dangerous. And this particular species may be my new favorite, because scientists are pretty sure that this bunny harvestman is on the lower left is probably mimicking some sort of dangerous creature that smaller creatures might fear. To us humans, we should probably call it the big bad wolf harvestman, because to me it looks like that's a wolf with a nose and two eyes and ears. And we'll see a video later. Fortunately, we'll see a video of this bunny harvestman in action. But in addition to camouflage and aposematism, mimicry is another primary line of defense. And we already saw armor or spines as a secondary defense. Another one is called thanatosis, which is pretty much playing dead or playing possum. So a harvestman will simulate death to either avoid detection or to stop an attacker, because they can remain virtually frozen for quite a while. And when they stop moving, they literally will disappear into the leaf litter, and good luck finding it. All legs in that tiny body. So they become rigid with their legs either retracted tightly or stretched out. And to all observers, they would appear dead if you could find them. Here's one that is doing just that. The next secondary defense mechanism, and I don't know, I think they're all my favorite now. This is called bobbing. And they essentially bounce their bodies around with those long, ungainly legs, essentially likely to confuse a predator as to where they should attack. It's just like walking around, just try to get me. And sometimes this can be slow and hypnotic, and sometimes it can be rapid and chaotic, literally bouncing around. It becomes much more confusing if there is a group of harvestmen, and aggregating in groups is another defense mechanism that we'll talk about in a little bit. But if a large group of harvestmen are all bobbing at the same time, slow or fast, it may be enough to cause a predator to give up and try to eat something that's less confusing and weird. But even if they do try to attack, they'll probably end up with a mouthful of legs, which may be okay, considering another secondary defense mechanism is called autotomy, or the voluntary amputation of a leg or other appendage. So if a predator gets hold of a leg of a harvestman, it might just let that leg go. It will break off at a predetermined place where it can quickly seal up the hole to prevent bleeding. The leg will not grow back unless you get an early instar. But if it's an adult harvestman, that leg will not grow back. And it will do this thing where if once it's pulled off, it will continue to twitch for several minutes or even up to an hour after it's detached from his body, because it has a little pacemaker located in that first segment that will continue to send signals to the muscles to alternately contract and relax and cause this twitching severed leg which the hope is that it will draw the attention of the predator towards that leg and away from the rest of the harvestman, so it can make a clean getaway. Well, not quite clean, because now it only has 7 legs. And while this is a handicap for the harvestmen, they're very quickly able to compensate and move around quite adeptly with only 7 legs. It does matter which legs they lose, because the second leg from the front is a very important sensory organ. And if it loses both of those, it's probably going to lose the ability to hunt. But it can probably lose 1, maybe even 2, and still get by. But of course, it's still going to be at a disadvantage, but better to lose a leg than a life. There's another defensive mechanism that involves their legs, but doesn't involve them losing it, is that if they're captured and it's not that bad, they may stridulate like a cricket does, or vibrate their legs to produce a sound. And sometimes that little sound or vibration is just enough to surprise the predator to let it go. And we're not clear if it's the vibration or the sound that kind of startles the predator, but I think of it as the joy buzzer effect. They give the predator enough of a surprising shock to give the animal a chance to make one more secondary defensive maneuver, which is fleeing, straight up running away. They can use those long legs to run very quickly, or better yet, they'll just let go of whatever they're on, if it's a tree or a rock or a cliff or your ceiling, and just drop to the ground where it can easily disappear in the leaf litter. So those are most of the defensive adaptations of the harvestman. And now we can move on to offense. So one advantage that harvestmen have over spiders is that they're able to eat solid food in addition to liquid food. Spiders can't do that. They have to liquefy their food, kind of turn everything into an acid smoothie before ingesting it. But harvestmen can eat solid food through a feeding apparatus called the stomotheca. So what do harvestmen eat? Many species are omnivorous. They'll eat small insects, springtails, earthworms, snails, as well as plant matter and fungi. Some are scavengers, and some specialize on bird poop. And other kinds of poop, but bird poop seems to be a favored delicacy in the harvestman menu. This is different from most arachnids like spiders, which are strictly carnivorous, but harvestmen can eat a lot of different things. Most are pretty good hunters. They usually will hunt by ambush, and they use their strong mouth parts to grab and tear apart their prey. Sometimes they'll explore their surroundings using those second pair of legs I mentioned. And so usually when you see a harvestman walking around, you'll kind of see it moving that second pair of legs to kind of touch and explore. So if you see them, watch them for a while and watch them do that. They have very poor eyesight, so those legs are like cat whiskers, and if they come across prey, they can move pretty lightning fast to subdue it. And some species also produce a sticky substance on their legs that helps them to subdue their prey. So they're pretty good hunters, just not of us. Reproduction is sexual, involving direct copulation, unlike spiders that put sperm in an external packet. But some male harvestmen will offer a secretion called a nuptial gift to give to the female before copulation that she will ingest, that's full of good nutrients. And then after copulation, a male may seek out that same female again and kind of shake or stimulate one of her sensory legs to entice her to mate a second time. Males are territorial, and they will often guard females for a while after copulation. Eggs are laid in protected places, sometimes in a constructed nest, and often it's the male that plays the role in guarding the eggs. So he not only will guard them, he will regularly clean them, keep parasites away, keep predators away, and sometimes he has to defend them against predators like female harvestmen that like to eat harvestman eggs. And after hatching, the harvestmen pass through about 6 nymphal instars before reaching their adult size. Unlike spiders, harvestmen tend to be very tolerant of other harvestmen of their own species, and will often aggregate in very large groups in your basement or your yard, or especially around water. In one species in South America, these aggregations can number more than 70,000 individuals, But in most cases, these aggregates don't get much past a couple hundred, which is still a lot. And so it looks like in this picture, it looks like it's just fur growing off the wall, but that's all spider legs. This, or I call them a spider. They're all harvestman eggs. That shows how ingrained that image is in our brains. This aggregation is likely anti-predator behavior, and it reduces the odds that any individual might be eaten, kind of like how penguins will get in a big, massive pod. But it also provides that confusion I was talking about. And there are practical terms. Getting together also provides moisture, a little moist microclimate. And because harvestmen are in danger of drying out, they do require that kind of dampness. This is probably why you most often see them in your basement. And the other thing is, if a group gets together in a large number and they each secrete that defensive scent, then it becomes much more effective and noxious. If you have hundreds releasing it at the same time, it can really deter predators. So we'll watch the first of two short videos. That this one looks at these aggregations, and it is from Insider. And enjoy. All right. Oh, don't want to do that. There we go. Okay. Another fun harvestman adaptation, just like a good bird who will preen their feathers, or a good raccoon that washes its catch or not. Harvestmen will meticulously clean their legs, particularly after they eat, by drawing each leg individually in turn through their jaws. And we'll see this in action in our second video here. And we'll go back to our bunny harvestman, or the big bad wolf, for another short video. It's only a couple of minutes long, and there's no sound. And I think we just usually want to hear sound in videos, but I encourage you to kind of embrace the silence and the slowness and the repetitiveness as we watch this next video. Notice it's using its second pair of legs here and just kind of putting them out there to explore. So the other thing that oops, to quote one of the pre-talk chats, that the eek factor is that they just move, so they have these long legs, but they keep that body so close to the ground as it moves. And I think to us humans, that's kind of an unnatural movement. And I don't know, I feel like a lot of aliens and in kind of the apocalyptic dystopian movies, you'll see them with those movements. So just really, really cool to watch them move. And like any group of organisms, there are invasive species and endangered species. It's just that we don't know as much about them. So oftentimes, harvestmen do not, even though they can move very quickly and cover ground very quickly, they tend to not move very far from where they're born. So they don't really disperse over a wide range very quickly. And probably because of this, there are many endemic species that are found in one place in the world, endemic to a particular mountain top or a particular cave. Here's a picture of the Edgewood microblind harvestman, which is only about 1 millimeter long, and it's found only in Edgewood Park in California. And this species is threatened by habitat loss because of the invasion of exotic grasses, and is now being considered for the endangered species list, which you don't see a lot of in harvestmen. And again, there's just not a lot of people paying attention, particularly when so many of them are so small. And there are likely many more species that we haven't found or that are vulnerable, and we just don't know it yet. And kind of in a weird twist, one of the reasons that we haven't studied harvestmen much is that because they're not a pest and they're not harmful to humans, so they don't attract a lot of funding as you would get for something that could cause diseases to humans or that can hurt us. And their problem is that they're just too benevolent, and so they haven't attracted a lot of research. So we'll kind of wrap this up with a few musing. First of all, in looking at some of the harvestmen from around the world, I just noticed how much they look like another group of crustaceans. The crabs, the lobsters, the shrimp, and in these two close-up photos, that really kind of shows up in my eye if you've ever had kind of a lobster dinner or a I don't know, looking at shrimp. They just kind of have that body plan, particularly in the back part of that top photo. And then something that we'll file in the it sucks to be a harvestman department is that they are pretty vulnerable to parasites internally because they eat solid food that introduces more chances for parasites to get in them. And then outside, they are vulnerable particularly to mites. And sometimes that's just kind of a bother, but this mite is attached on. And even by running it through the jaws, they're holding on so tight that they can't really get rid of them. And it is sucking that hemolymph. But if it's just one, it's probably a bother. It probably won't be too detrimental. But sometimes you get several on one, and that just really sucks. And then there's this poor friend who just made it really hard to take good pictures. So there are some closely related pseudoscorpions that can also be found, these tiny little pseudoscorpions, but they don't hurt the harvestman. They don't suck its blood. They just kind of use it as a pseudoscorpion lift, and they just hitchhike from one place to another on something that has much more efficient locomotion than they do. The colloquial name daddy longlegs has been given to many other groups of animals, including these two groups of non-related arthropods and a plant that's in Australia. But the arthropods here are crane flies, which are often mistaken for mosquitoes, and then a group of long-legged spiders called the cellar spiders. And it's possible that one of these Australian cellar spiders gave the daddy longlegs a reputation that they're pretty nasty and pretty venomous. But it's easy to see why all of these groups have been given the name daddy longlegs. So daddy longlegs can cover more. Harvestmen covers that specific order. And then in the random trivia department, sometimes harvestmen have been referred to as shepherd spiders. And the name opiliones comes from the root word for shepherd because of their unusually long legs, which reminded somebody of the European shepherds that use stilts to better keep an eye on their wandering flocks. So a long stilt on each leg and another one or two in their hands for balance gave these shepherds a very daddy long leg-like appearance. And then the name harvestmen or harvesters, the term was adopted by Martin Lister, a British naturalist and one of Queen Anne's personal physicians. In the 1600s, this group of arachnids, already known for being seen most often during the harvest time of fall, was the center of a superstitious belief that if you kill the harvestman, you will get a bad harvest that year. So I didn't include that on the secondary defenses of harvestmen, but because we thought it was bad luck to kill them, that helped them out. In fact, many cultures see harvestmen as a sign of good fortune, hope, and happiness. And it's also thought that if you hold the daddy longlegs by all but one of its legs, the remaining leg will point in the direction of lost cattle. So they are pretty useful in that regard if you need them. So if you make it out into your backyard or other green space in the next few weeks, it's a good time to find harvestmen. And if you see them, let them crawl on you. You can marvel at their delicate, non-venomous, non-spider selves. See if you can get them to crawl on you, and just take a closer look at that amazing body plan, or just take a look at what they're doing by themselves in your backyard or anywhere else. But please don't step on them. They don't deserve it. And why would you want to take the risk that your garden harvest might fail? So thanks, everyone. I'm going to turn off my screen here and